In this podcast episode, Jeremiah Johnston provides a deep dive into the Shroud of Turin, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the broader historical and scientific contexts surrounding evidence of Jesus Christ. He places the Shroud of Turin at the center of the discussion as perhaps the most unique and historically significant artifact related to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, examining the artifact from multiple perspectives, including biblical texts, forensic evidence, scientific scrutiny, archaeology, and the controversies that continue to swirl around it. Johnston begins by defining what a burial cloth, or shroud, means in the Jewish context, a linen garment used to wrap the dead according to late Second Temple Jewish customs. The dimensions of the Shroud of Turin correspond with the known measurements of burial cloths from the 1st century, roughly 14 feet by 5 feet, made from fine linen with a distinctive herringbone weave indicative of wealth, aligning with biblical references to Joseph of Arimathea providing a cloth for Jesus' burial. The shroud is exceptional, not because it is simply a burial cloth, but because it bears the image of a crucified man, which perfectly corresponds to what is known historically and biblically about Roman crucifixion practices. Johnston highlights that while numerous burial cloths from antiquity have been found, including some dating back thousands of years, like Egyptian linen garments, none else carry such an image, nor the same forensic details. The man's image on the shroud is that of a tall, strong individual aged around 30, with wounds consistent with Roman crucifixion. Nail wounds in the wrists and heels, a gash on the side that matches the spear wound described in John's Gospel, and signs of intense scourging all over the body. The blood stains are type AB, a rare Semitic blood type, further authenticating the human and regional aspects of the shroud. The shroud's image is also uniquely a photographic negative, with three-dimensional information encoded within it, a phenomenon unknown in any artwork. The image lies only about 2 microns deep on the fabric's surface, a feat impossible to replicate even with modern technology. Johnston discusses how the shroud survived multiple fires over centuries, necessitating repairs that unfortunately complicated later scientific investigations. In 1988, carbon dating conducted by 3 laboratories controversially dated the shroud to the medieval period, 1260 to 1390 AD, an assertion that Johnston thoroughly critiques. He explains that the carbon-dated samples came from a corner that had been patched centuries after the original cloth's creation, containing cotton fibers absent from the rest of the linen. Furthermore, this data was suppressed for nearly 3 decades, obscuring the fact that the carbon dating did not authentically represent the shroud. Johnston elaborates on the extensive and multidisciplinary scientific examination undertaken especially since the mid-1970s, involving over 100 academic fields and hundreds of thousands of study hours. The famous 1978 Shroud of Turin research project, with 33 elite scientists, conclusively found that the image is not a painting or fake. Instead, it is a chemical change on the linen fibers consistent with an intense burst of energy, possibly linked to the moment of resurrection, lasting an infinitesimally short time, measured in fractions of a billionth of a second. The image exhibits no evidence of pigment, dye, or brushstrokes, and its atomic and molecular structure differs from anything produced by human artistry. Johnston presents the perspective of experts like physicist Paolo Di Lazzaro, who replicated the type of superficial chemical change on linen fibers using pulsed laser energy, but it required an unprecedented amount of power. These findings, along with forensic observations of wounds and biological markers, align so precisely with historical records and biblical accounts that the probability is astronomically high, 1 in 200 billion, that the shroud depicts Jesus of Nazareth. Tracing the shroud's provenance, Johnston discusses its earliest textual traces. While it is directly referenced in all 4 Gospels in the context of Jesus' burial, the first explicit historical records appear in the early 4th century writings of church historian Eusebius, who describes a face cloth preserved in Edessa, modern-day Şanlıurfa, Turkey. The shroud reportedly spent around 900 years in Edessa before traveling through Constantinople and several European locations, eventually coming into the hands of the Savoy family and then passing to the Catholic Church only in 998. 3. Johnston highlights the significance of the shroud's pollen evidence, discovered by forensic scientist Max Fry, which chemically contains pollen species endemic to Jerusalem and its surrounds, blooming specifically during Passover, precisely when Jesus was crucified. This botanical fingerprint confirms a Middle Eastern origin and supports the shroud's historical authenticity. Furthermore, he addresses the reluctance of the Catholic Church to fully endorse or widely display the shroud, speculating that institutional caution about authenticity and the reluctance to politicize a delicate issue play roles in its restricted access. Johnston provides an up-close look at the brutal nature of Roman crucifixion, explaining that it was designed to be the most agonizing and humiliating execution method possible, reserved for slaves, rebels, and the vilest criminals. He walks listeners through Jesus' trial and torture, unveiling the physical realities behind scourging with a flagrum, a whip with lead and bone tips, the crown of thorns, a painful helmet made from Bethlehem thorn bushes with sharp barbs, carrying the crossbeam, weighing over 100 pounds, the piercing of the wrists and heels with nails, and the final spear thrust through the side. Each of these details is corroborated by the forensic evidence on the shroud, including over 700 wounds visible in the image, signs of pulmonary edema, and the pattern of blood and serum consistent with biblical description. He discusses the physiological causes of death by crucifixion, noting suffocation due to the body's position, loss of blood, organ failure, and heart failure, conceding that Jesus' death was swift by crucifixion standards, taking about 3 hours. Turning to the Dead Sea Scrolls, Johnston touches on their discovery in 1947 near Qumran and how these ancient manuscripts shed light on the religious, cultural, and scriptural context of Jesus' time. However, he critiques the restrictive access to many scroll fragments held by governments and academia, leading to slow dissemination and occasional suppression of information. While some organizations like the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, CSNTM, actively digitize and publish manuscripts, much remains uncatalogued and unavailable. He highlights the challenge posed by entrenched skepticism and ideological opposition within much of modern biblical scholarship, which often dismisses miraculous accounts or limits discussion to naturalistic explanations. Johnston discusses his personal experience in academia, facing doubt and hostility when affirming the resurrection as historical fact rather than myth or allegory. Throughout the conversation, Johnston stresses that the synergy of biblical accounts, archaeological sites, historical writings, including non-Christian sources like Tacitus and Josephus, and cutting-edge scientific research creates a compelling cumulative case for the historical Jesus and the authenticity of the events described in the New Testament. He calls Christianity archaeology's closest cousin, noting that even secular and Jewish archaeologists rely on biblical texts to guide digs in Israel. His respect for honest inquiry and truth-seeking shines as he urges believers and skeptics alike to follow the evidence wherever it leads, underscoring that belief grounded in evidence strengthens faith rather than undermines it. The podcast closes with a reminder that artifacts like the Shroud of Turin serve as powerful, tangible links to the central Christian narrative of death and resurrection.